What I would want to say, in particular to my daughter, is that me thinking about killing myself had nothing to do with them, nothing to do with how much I love them or how much I would miss them. It was all about the pain that I felt inside, that they shouldn't see it as a reflection of how I felt about them.
Hey there, my name is Sean, and this is Suicide Noted. On this podcast, I talk with suicide attempt survivors and ideators so that we can hear their stories. Every year around the world, millions of people try to take their own lives, and we almost never talk about it. We certainly don't talk about it enough, and when we do talk about it, when we engage, we're not very good at it. So one of my goals with this podcast and the tour is to have more conversations and hopefully better conversations with survivors, in large part to help more people in more places hopefully feel a little less shitty and a little less alone. Now, if you are a suicide attempt survivor or ideator and you'd like to talk, I'd love to talk with you. Please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com. There's all kinds of ways you can support this work. You'll find all of that information on the website, the podcast description, the show notes, including the tax-deductible donation for the tour, among other projects. I'm recording this on Sunday, September 28th. Our first event was earlier today here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We had 2 past guests join me on stage. We had about 25 people in the audience. The conversation went well. Audience engagement went well. I am really pleased. I'm really grateful. So thank you all very much. If you're involved, if you will be involved, listeners from all over the world, it's all good. You're all part of it. So thank you very much. In the show notes, you can also find a link to Eventbrite, our collection, which is a list of all the current cities we're going to that are scheduled. There are several we're working on. So as they get scheduled and set to go, we'll post them. So if you want to have an overview of all of them, maybe we're coming to a city near you, please check that out. And remember, we have got that poll, a weekly poll in Spotify. I want to hear your thoughts on some of these questions I'm asking. So have a look if you can. Finally, we are talking about suicide on this podcast. My guests and I do not hold back, so please take that into account before you listen or as you listen. But I do hope you listen because there is so much to learn. Today I am talking with Julio. Julio lives in New York, and he is a suicide attempt survivor. Hey, Julio.
Hey, what's up, man? How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. Always appreciate another middle-aged man wanting to talk about this stuff, you know? How old are you?
I'll be 50 in August, so I'm feeling it.
Start a podcast of Over 50 Sucks, and anybody who thinks it doesn't can go fuck themselves podcast. That's just me. You're probably a little bit more relaxed and nice. I know you're into jujitsu.
No, yeah, but I've been writing about aging a lot lately, man. You hit that wall that you never thought you'd hit, you know?
It's not just a number. It's your body.
Yeah.
I'm hurting. You're in New York?
I am. New York and Brooklyn.
Why are we here?
We're here because I think there's nothing more important than mental health. And I think as someone who's dealt with suicidal ideation for as long as I could remember, I think it's something that needs to be talked about, you know? I'm sure there are way more people going through it than we realize. Such a painful thing to go through. You're living this isolated existence because you don't really want to share it with other people and you don't want to bring anyone else down. And so I think a lot of people suffer with it in silence. And those are the most dreaded thoughts to have to deal with in silence, all alone, you know? So that's why I'm here.
Cool. I appreciate it. So you're an ideator, meaning you've been thinking about it, I imagine, to varying degrees for, you said, years?
Yeah, since I was a kid, probably 8.
How does somebody, in this case you, but, you know, in a sense, when you're talking, like you said, there's others out there and they'll hear that, oh shit, me too. How do you go more than 4 decades thinking about this? Yeah, how does that work? How do you get through?
Deep down inside, I feel like I didn't want to do it. So like there were 2 attempts. I think if I was trying hard enough, I would have succeeded.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's just keep beating ourselves up.
Right, right, exactly.
Let me back up for a few minutes and then we'll get more into sort of the meat of it. How'd you find the podcast?
Well, I've got a new book out, so I was searching for podcasts that I could be on as a guest, mental health podcasts. So when I came across yours, like you said, it's unique. I mean, most of them are talking about depression and anxiety and ADHD and bipolar, which I have both. So I've been on several different podcasts having to do with mental health, but nothing is touched on suicide. So that's what drew me to yours.
There's a sense in some people that, and I don't think this is you, that there are certain things we shouldn't talk about or can't talk about or should talk about in a certain way. And I honor them.
Mm,
I think I understand where they're coming from, but my angle is a little bit different. And I do try to do it as ethically and responsibly as I can. But at some point, we just need to have these fucking conversations. And
yeah,
somebody might get a little ruffled and somebody might even get triggered. That's not the goal. People are suffering. Guys like us, the middle-aged men, I mean, talk about not talking about it.
yeah,
Are you kidding
yeah,
me? I
yeah,
can't imagine how many, and this isn't hyperbole, but how many guys like us are struggling and they're not talking about it. And one of the reasons is they don't know how or where to do it.
yeah. I mean, I think people freak out about it so much if it's talked about. So many people freak out, that you don't want to say anything because you think you're going to be looked down upon or being seen as a quitter or something, which so many guys say, well, you need to pull through and don't be weak. Being considered weak is a huge thing when it comes to suicide.
Right.
So,
You're in the fine. We'll get into this a little bit if you want, but I know that you have a big background in the martial arts. So I don't know how that plays a role with fighters.
as we were talking about that, as we were just talking, I thought about a martial arts teammate of mine who actually followed through with his suicide a few years ago, and that hit us all pretty hard, because we trained together so often, and I actually trained him for his last fight. We were together the day before my life fell apart, like where I knew I was going to get divorced and everything else. We were together, and I was telling him how great life was, how happy I was, how everything was perfect, and
Hmm.
we were wrapping our hands. So I'll never forget, because of who I was talking to that day. Little did I know that a couple years later he'd be gone. Yeah, and life would fall apart for me, like right after that. It's wild.
We're here mostly to talk about you, but I have a question about that. This has nothing about you, what I'm about to ask, but did you have any idea? Did he get any signs? Did you have any clue? I know it was a couple of years before he did it.
Yeah, zero. When I say
Yeah.
zero, this guy lived for his kids.
Right.
Lived for his kids. Every weekend, he was the baseball coach. He was the basketball coach. He was the martial arts coach. So I never would have imagined, man, such a doting dad. But there was a sequence of events looking back and then knowing stuff afterwards where it kind of was clear where it started and how it kind of
Mhm.
snowballed. But no, there was no way anybody knew or thought that he would do that. No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you try to piece it together, right? Okay, that happened. And then
Yeah.
my best friend, this is going back several years, was a New York City police officer. And in his late 20s, he ended his life. Were there signs? Not then. Now you look back, okay, yeah. And then let's try to piece it together and try to come up with something that we'll never know is actually true, but that's his human nature, right? Like, okay, well, okay. And then that happened and maybe that. But at the end of the day, like,
Yeah, to be inside their mind at that last moment is impossible.
yeah, you should know, Julio. Over the last 5 years in doing this podcast, I came to enjoy helping people create memoir titles for their lives. Not that they even want it or they'll ever
Mm.
write the book. It's just a fun thing I do. You already one possibility. May I share it with you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The day before my life fell apart.
Ah, yeah,
You don't need my help with this because, like a handful of other guests I've had, you already got the book.
right.
We'll talk about that a little later, but please
Yeah.
tell me the title now.
Well, there's two. The first one is kind of a memoir. It's called Broke Down Sensei, and it's about how everything collapsed. But I was going through bipolar cycling at the time, so it turned into kind of a chronicling of the ups and downs of bipolar cycling instead of what I intended it to be at first. But the second book turned out how I intended the first book to be. So because I was on my medication and I was stable and I was able to write clear-headed, and I wasn't going up and down constantly. So
And what about the second one? What's that title?
internal jujitsu and using martial arts principles to deal with depression and anxiety and suicidal
Mm.
thoughts. And
Is there anything out there like that?
not that I know of. I mean, there's an old book called Zen and the Martial Arts, maybe kind of similar, but I had in mind two books in particular: The War of Art and The Book of Five Rings by Musashi. Right, so I had this idea of blending those two books, but of course, with me, there's a huge element of mental health in there. So,
And all the while, particularly with one of the books, you're dealing with your own stuff as you try to
mhm,
write the book.
right, yeah.
Not like you're in the clear and now everything's great.
Right. I wasn't looking at it from the outside. I was deep in it, So one day I'd be fantasizing or I'd be delusional and thinking that I was like a Christ figure. And then the next day I'd be suicidal. Yeah, and that's the way it went.
I wonder if the both can coexist. Apparently they can.
Interesting question. I mean, were they coexisting? I guess one is right under the surface of the other.
Perhaps. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No, I know one of the reasons you reached out. I want to talk about your book, and I get it. And I hope that being here and the listeners can help that. But what's in the book and what's in our conversation for me selfishly matters more
Hmm.
because I think it's important that we talk about this. And I don't favor one kind of person or demographic, but I really do appreciate middle to older age men talking. One, because I'm one of them, and two, because we don't do it much. Thank you. When were those two attempts or almost attempts or however you want to frame them? How
Yeah.
old were you for those?
The first one I was 25, which was like the hardest year of my life until I got to my 40s. And the second was when I was 47, so
Mm-hmm.
just a couple of years ago. I grew up in a really rough neighborhood in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, and
Mm-hmm.
it was the 80s, the crack epidemic, and we lived in a building that was infested with drugs, and there was a lot of violence in the neighborhood, and tension at home. So there was never a feeling of safety. There was constant feeling like there was something bad was going to happen right around the corner. So I was always tense and I was always afraid. I started lifting weights when I was 12, and that was around the same time I started seeing a psychiatrist, and I started writing at that same time. I think everything kind of coalesced. And it was all because I needed to let out these feelings, in different ways. So I started bodybuilding to kind of build this strong facade on the outside because I was so frightened all the time. I became a teenage champion and was probably the youngest kid to win a teen and men's overall in the same contest. I was 14. No, how old was I? I think I was 17. I was 17 and I beat
Wow.
the adult men in the contest. So it was a big deal. And I thought I wanted to do that professionally. But really I was just covering up the fact that I was this scared little kid on the inside. And I knew that if I had big muscles, nobody would bother me. And it worked. Nobody used to bother me. So it protected me. And then when I retired from bodybuilding, I was 23. I didn't think I would ever quit doing it, but I got fed up with the lifestyle and the amount of drugs you had to take, and it was just ridiculous. So I quit. And when I quit, I was lost. I had been doing it since I was, 12, 13 years old. It was my identity. And not only was it my identity, but physically, I was starting to change very quickly. I was losing all the muscle. So I didn't look like myself. I didn't feel like myself anymore. And I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I started acting as a teenager too. And I was hosting a TV show on PBS while I was competing in bodybuilding, and going to NYU. And so I had a pretty busy life early on. But after bodybuilding and after the TV show, I was really lost. So that's when I made that first attempt. I mean, I felt like, well, life is over. Here I was 25 years old, but as a teen, I always thought I was going to do everything. I was going to be the youngest to do everything, right? So at 25, I felt washed up. I was like, well, this is it. It's over anyway. I remember I was in my kitchen and I just grabbed the bottle. It was prescription painkillers. So it wasn't going to do anything to me, but I drank the whole bottle. I lied down on the kitchen floor and I just went to sleep. And I imagined that I wouldn't wake up. I'm like, all right, most likely not going to wake up from this. So it's going to be over. And I went to sleep and I woke up on the kitchen floor, and part of me felt like I had failed at something. I don't remember
Yeah.
feeling a sense of relief at all. Felt like I'm still stuck in the same life and I still have the same problems. It wasn't like, man, I'm glad I didn't follow through with that. It took some time to get out of the depression that I was in at that time. Yeah.
Did you want to die?
It felt like it at the time. And I think because I've had that feeling again so many times. But here's the thing, in these moments now, I have my daughter to keep me out of it. Back then, I don't know what was keeping me alive much of the time. I guess it
Yeah.
was thinking about my family and about how my mom would feel.
When you were 25, couple questions. Were you living alone at 25?
Yeah.
So when you say you go and you grab the bottle, and by the way, you said it wouldn't have worked. I think a bottle of prescription pain pills could work.
Yeah. I mean, I guess because nothing happened to me, I thought I saw it as harmless. And because I did so many drugs when I was
Yeah,
a
right.
teenager and when I got older that I never took drugs that seriously.
But why might it have been for you, Julio, from Brooklyn, scared kid, big muscle, acting, all of it? Why do you think you wanted to do it?
I think it's a combination of feeling like I was always not enough. I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood, you know? I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't understand why God put me there. I didn't really believe in God at the time, but I didn't understand why I was there. So that outsider feeling, when you have that and then you deal with depression, with serious clinical depression, you already feel like you're isolated in some way from the world. Even if you're not really, you feel that isolation because feeling like an outsider always stayed with me from the time I was a kid. Because when I would make friends, they would be friends that were outside of the neighborhood that I grew up in. It's a
Hmm.
different circle of people. But I never really felt like I fit in with them either because I knew I wasn't like them. You know,
Yeah.
I knew I came from a different place and I was this dark skinned Puerto Rican kid and they were different from me. And I could never get that out of my head, even if they were my friends, you know? So I never felt like somebody genuinely liked me. That, along with the fear made me feel so ashamed, you know, so embarrassed. And the fact that I felt like I couldn't deal with life. Like you said, other people can deal with it. They don't think about killing themselves. They just go on, you know?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what almost anything's happening out there, right? But
Yeah.
some people do that. They grab the gun or they grab the bottle or they climb up
Mm,
the building, and it's just a curiosity for me.
yeah.
Question I'll never get fully answered is what is that difference? You know what's fascinating to me? And it's just a lesson I keep learning, or at least I'm reminded of. I'm talking to you. You're well spoken, good looking guy, accomplished, from what I've learned, and you'll share more about and I don't know if the word's accomplishments, but it sounds like you've done really good work in the space of martial arts, right? You're this bodybuilder, very successful, even acting, that's kind of cool. You check a lot of boxes, and it
Yeah.
just reminds me it doesn't make a damn difference in this space we're talking about.
Yeah. When I've seemed to have my life perfect, I mean, I had my family, my a brand new gorgeous daughter. I had an awesome business. I had a brand new home that we renovated and made it into our dream home. You know, I had the car, I had everything. But I was thinking about death every fucking day, every day,
Me.
you know,
Mhm.
and I couldn't understand why. It would piss me off so much. It's like wake up, look at what you have in front of you, but I just couldn't, man. I just couldn't, you know?
Were you diagnosed clinically depressed then?
Yeah, from when I was a kid. I
Okay.
didn't get my other diagnoses until I was older, but the depression that came early. Yeah.
Well, and so certainly that's playing a big role. So if we could magically take the depression out, would you be thinking about ending your life every day? I guess we don't know for sure.
I don't think so. I think
Right.
the overwhelming sadness made life just like way too heavy, you know, like you just walking around with a heavy heart all the time and it just feels like a drag. And then when you feel like a drag, you feel like you're dragging other people down and you feel like you're not contributing to the world anything positive and you feel like, well, what's the point? I don't need to be around. Nobody's going to miss me.
And if the filter is, because one of the words you use is like, it's never enough or I'm
Mm,
not enough. One of the things I've learned from my own life and talking to people is when you're in that space, and I don't mean to get psychobabbly here, I promise you, it ain't gonna matter. Like you could win the Olympics, you could win the competition, you can make $1 billion, but if the lens or the filter is that, that's the fascinating thing. And I don't mean fascinating in a, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
So nothing you see externally with people is what you are potentially seeing as truth.
Right. Yeah. People think Instagram is only online, only something that, you know, social media, but really it's everywhere. Everywhere you look, everybody's got this facade going, you know. And knowing especially how my life seemed so great, you know, now when I look at anyone, I don't buy it. I don't buy whatever they're selling, you know.
One other question about that day when you were 25, and then we'll sort of connect the dots and move forward. Maybe a couple more. Did anybody know that Julio, at 25 years old, grabbed that bottle and tried to end his life?
No.
Never told anybody.
No.
To this day?
I mean, besides therapists, well, I don't recall discussing it. The
What, what,
second attempt, yes. I
what,
don't know.
why
I
do
guess there was such a long gap between that incident and when I started working on myself again, because for a long time, martial arts took the place of me having to do some hard work. And I started kind of a spiritual journey and martial arts at the same time, but it took me a long time to kind of look back at my life honestly and see the things that you know, caused me to be in the mental state that I was in the present, or some decisions that I had made, or the stuff about my childhood and the trauma. You know, for me to examine that stuff, it took me again till I was like 40 probably to really look at that again. So I think that's why I never talked to other people about it. I guess I didn't feel comfortable enough at the time, you know. I had a
Is
girlfriend that I was with for a long time at the time, but I didn't tell her. I thought it would worry her too much.
is part of the reason you said discomfort, and that might be the perfect word. Is it a shame thing to it all, or no?
There definitely is a shame thing to it. I think there's again the idea that you can't handle things, you know, that you were just looking to quit. And of course there's a religious element for anybody that, you know, believes, you know, that's a sin. So
I'm wondering something because I don't have all like sort of the demographics or psychographics of people who might be listening, but from what I've learned in the Black community, African American community, tend to talk about it a little bit less. Similar at all in your community?
I would have said yes until the last 2 years because my family's been helping me so much with my issues. They've really been there
Mhm.
in understanding, and my parents in particular. And they were very much from that kind of era where you don't talk about it. You know, they deal with their own issues and they've never dwelled on anything, you know, even though it's
Mhm.
obvious that there's stuff going on with them from because of their past. They don't really see it that way. So I think there's this attitude that you know you deal with it and you move on. And I think with me, they would have treated me that way if they didn't see how severe things were. Like they've seen me have episodes in front of them, so they understand how I can get when I'm symptomatic, and they understand, you know, why I need my medication, and so they've seen me at my worst. In a lot of ways, it's been a blessing because it's allowed me to get help that I wouldn't have asked for in the past for my family.
The hiding days are done for Julio.
Yeah. My daughter asked me, "Oh, Dad, what's the podcast you're going to be on today?" I said, "Well, the name is kind of mature, so I don't want to tell you the name." But yeah, so oh, is it a curse word? Is it? Like, no, it's not a curse word, you know, but it's a little mature. That's all.
How old is she?
She's 10. We talk about death, you know. We used to talk about it when she was much younger, actually, and what we thought about happens when people die. And she's pretty good with dealing with death, yeah, talking about it, which I was not. When I was a kid, I was so afraid of talking about death with other people. When my dad would mention, oh, you know, he'd always say, I'm only gonna last till I'm 50 or 60. You know, he would say some stupid shit like that. And it would freak me out because I didn't want to think that my parents were mortal and anybody in my life was mortal, you know, or you know that could ever happen. So it's interesting that I was so suicidal for so long because death scared me for so long. Especially when I was hypomanic, I had no fear of death because I didn't see death as real. You know, I saw it as just an illusion, and I saw it as when we die, we just wake up again as you know, as us slightly different in another place, another universe, if you will. So when I'm hypomanic, I have absolutely zero fear of death or dying, which can
Yeah,
get tricky if you no longer fear death. Now, what happens there? You talked about the feelings of living at the same time. What if they did at some moment? What if I was hypomanic and somehow the depression layered over it? So now I don't fear death, but I want to die. Then what? You know?
then you probably don't. We're not having this conversation.
Right. Yeah.
You wonder how many people out there that happened to.
Yeah, I've just become so frustrated by their symptoms that they just can't take it anymore,
Sure.
you know.
You use the word episodes with your folks. These episodes, are you referring to? And you said a few other things. You're referring to bipolar.
I'm referring to CPTSD episodes. So, and it's kind of a combination, I think. It's interesting when I don't take my Adderall, I can have episodes like the Adderall actually calms down they're traumatic flashbacks basically. So I get super afraid and I feel like I need to escape, you know, I'm jumpy and jittery and sometimes I start to cry because it just feels so overwhelming. I start to shake. I usually start to cry actually when it's bad. So my parents have seen me in that state, you know, freaking out when I didn't have my meds and they knew, you know, and I was like, I need to go get my medication like right away. There was a huge Adderall shortage for a long time. So that was an issue for a lot of us with ADHD, you know. But yeah, so it's the post-traumatic stress disorder that causes those flashbacks. But everything's layered on top. The ADHD is layered on top of it and the bipolar. So if I'm dealing with bipolar depression and I have a flashback, they kind of trigger each other.
CPTSD. The T is the big word there. What's the trauma? What are the traumas? Can you identify them? And or do you want to share them?
Well, the daily fear from being a kid. So the complex trauma is you're going through it, on a day by day basis, sort of. As a kid, I got robbed at gunpoint. I had knives pulled on me. I got into tons of street fights and tons of fights at school. But every fight, I was fucking terrified. I never wanted to fight, but I had no choice. I was from a tough neighborhood. I had a tough brother. That's just what you did. You fought, but I was so, I hated it. I hated it.
Interesting. You fight because, in a sense, you have to survive. But for many people, what then happens is that like you end up being potentially forever in a constant state of like survival mode in part because of that.
Yeah, that's what happens. Your fight or flight chemicals get triggered, and now all of a sudden you're in the situation where you feel like you're getting like chased by a lion or something, and meanwhile there's nothing happening, but the chemicals in your body are telling you something else.
Fight, flight, freeze, fawn,
Freak the fuck out.
or freak the fuck out, right? So from 25, you have your attempt. How do you get post attempt at 25 years old, laying there on your floor, being like, "What the hell just happened?" What happens for the next 15 years?
At 25, I decided, that I wanted to continue and pursue acting. So I started bartending. Bartending leads to lots of drinking. So I think that was really bad for my disorders. And I started partying a lot, lots of ecstasy. That started in my early 20s, though. So I think that affected my dopamine levels and stuff too, which led to me getting more depressed. So that was my 20s, bartending, going on auditions, writing screenplays. I was writing screenplays at the time and stage plays. And that was my 20s. And then when I turned 30 is when I started teaching martial arts. And that's when things started to shift for me. I got away from acting and I got away from writing, which I didn't want to do, but that was because of my relationships. So long story. My life became martial arts from 30 to 40. My academy was kind of a distraction, and my training was a distraction from the way I was feeling. But eventually, depression started to take hold again. Running my school and having all these students looking up to me, it was really tough to kind of expose that side of myself, but I couldn't really hold it in. I was terrible at hiding it, at hiding the depression when it got really, really bad. So my students started to pick up on it. They started noticing the difference in me. I started kind of bringing the vibe down of the school, I think. Thankfully, they were all willing to kind of be, not all, but most of them were willing to be there for me. But I know it made a lot of them uncomfortable that somebody they saw as kind of the strong figure, and for some of them a father figure, was going through this kind of pain, and felt weak on the inside because they were looking at me for strength. They were looking at me as the example of, the strong leader. And I couldn't be that if I was depressed and suicidal.
Isn't it interesting that when a grown leader, a grown man, strong man, expresses signs of depression and vulnerability, depression, we see that as weakness?
Yeah.
This, to me, is part of this bigger problem. Is that a weakness? Now, look, if you can't show up for work and do your job, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Weakness? See, the thing is about this podcast, Julio, that I always find fascinating, and it's not the podcast, it's the conversations, is that when we talk about strength and resilience and all of these words that come up, and typically in our culture, not all, but maybe I have a certain lens, we say, what a badass, he ran a marathon or she became the CEO. Sure, kudos to you. I'll tell you who the strongest motherfuckers are in the world that I have ever met. People who want to kill themselves and don't do it and keep surviving. That is not hyperbole in any way. So it's fascinating to me and enlightening and informative and a bunch of other things to hear that when you were going through that, wow, you were going through a tough time, and it made some people there feel not okay. Anyway, that was a long-winded way of me saying, huh.
Yeah. I had kind of been used to it from when I was a kid with my family, because again, I was depressed from the time I was, a little kid, and it
Yeah.
was frustrating for them to see it, mostly because they wanted good for me and they didn't want to think of me being sad. And so I knew that the people around me were affected by it. So I did my best not to affect my students. Like I would take a lot of time to myself and have like my assistants teach the classes when I knew I couldn't. And my assistants knew, and one of them in particular, has his own disorders that he deals with, and he deals with very, very bad depression. So we kind of would help each other out. He'd cover for me when I needed it, and I'd help him out when he needed it. So that was super helpful. to have at least one person that I knew I could rely on that would understand. But yeah, it definitely made me afraid to express myself completely. But then eventually when the floodgates kind of opened and I couldn't hold back anymore, I was so open that it made people more uncomfortable.
Mm.
Because now here I am like facing mental illness and declaring, hey, I've got some stuff going on and I'm working on it and I understand that other people deal with it and you're not alone and but some people don't want to think about that. They don't want to think about them being sick or their family or so it just makes them really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it did for a lot of my students. It did.
So is there like a sort of breaking point where you just keep trudging through?
I mean, I just kept going because I remember telling my ex-wife, after I got medicated, diagnosed and medicated, that man, I couldn't believe I was seeing the world in a completely different way. And that I knew now that it was my mission to help people that were struggling with these same issues. And I
Mhm.
remember her saying, well, honey, that's great, but I think that might be bad for the business. She didn't want me to start putting that stuff on social media. And she thought, that it would affect the bottom line and I didn't care. I was like, well, what's the point of me having a platform if I can't say what I want to say and talk about the things that I think are important? And here I have an audience, every day that I can help out in a personal way. So I didn't want to throw that away. I had all these kids that relied on
Ah.
me and even these adults that, some that were older than me that still would tell me that I was like a father figure to them. So I felt this huge sense of responsibility that if there was anyone struggling in that class, in that room, that I had to help them. I had to be there for them.
I don't know where we're going with this, but I would imagine if you kept that going, you just end up attracting some different kinds of clients who did appreciate what you were doing and needed it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I've never thought of that, but
I struggle, and I'm telling you, man, if I could afford you, I'd hire you in a heartbeat because you get it, and I assume you know what you're doing with the martial art part of it.
yeah,
It's jujitsu for you, right?
it's jujitsu, judo, kickboxing, MMA, Krav Maga,
Is
a
there
lot of.
anything you don't do, Julio? Jesus.
I don't do kung fu. It's
I'm just saying, man, like, damn.
a good T-shirt, actually. I don't do kung fu.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great t-shirt. So you're basically running this business. You said you were ideating for 40 plus years. I know at some point your marriage dissolves. I know at some point you have a kid. So now you're in your 40s. And this is all happening mostly in Brooklyn?
No, in Queens at the time, in
Oh,
Astoria, Queens. Yeah,
oh, okay. You were in Astoria. All right. I actually lived in Sunnyside Gardens for a while.
yeah, it's
Not
great.
far. Not far at all. So how do we get to 47? And that's the second attempt.
When my divorce happened, which was 2018, I decided to sell my school. It was for a couple of reasons. I mean, my ex-wife and I, it was like our baby, that school, before we had our baby. So there was a lot of emotion attached to it. I found out that there were some employees that were made me think they had my back while I was dealing with the divorce, but ended up they were complaining about working too many hours and all this stuff. But I'd actually had friends of mine that were willing to cover my classes for free, but this employee told them that he would handle it, and then he was complaining about working too many hours. So that upset me at the time. I was hypomanic at the time, so I was making decisions like rash decisions. So I
Hmm.
was with my daughter when I heard that news, and I drove right over to the school. They were having a tournament at the time, a promotional tournament. So it was packed with kids and parents. And I walked in with my daughter and I said, okay, guys, I'm sorry. I have to make an announcement. I'm going to sell the school. I'm going to go write a book. And this is something I have to do. And it's been great. And thank you, everybody. And that was it. I walked out. Now, remember, these are people that see me as a father figure. And I just walked in out of nowhere after being gone for a couple of weeks and told them, that's it. I'm going to be out of your life, and walked out and left them all together, like to be like, what the fuck just happened? At the time, I felt like they should be there for me because I was going through this tough time. I didn't realize what I was doing to them. I didn't realize that if they had their own abandonment issues, I was triggering the shit out of everybody in there. And I know for a fact that with one of my closest students, she dealt with that when I walked away. It was really hard for her. Yeah, that's one of the things that I hate to say that I have a regret, but doing it in that way, it was pretty harsh. It was pretty harsh for them. But I felt like I was on top of the world and I was doing no wrong and this was what I had to do. So that's when I got rid of the school. I sold the school and I started doing private classes. And I took a year where all I did was a couple of privates and like just to hang out. I moved to this building that had a pool on the roof. So I was at the pool every single day and just having a good time and enjoying life, or so I thought, but really I was kind of filling this hole that I had after my divorce. I didn't take the time to mourn my divorce. I kind of jumped right into, because again, I was hypomanic. So I'm like, well, this is it. Life is going to be great now. Everything's going to open up for me and I'm going to spend all this money because I know there's going to be tons more money coming. I have nothing to worry about. So I decided, all right, I'm barely going to work this year, but I'm going to spend more than I've ever spent. So I spent myself into the ground, and which made me even more depressed. And that's when the ideation got really, really bad. I was in this great apartment by myself. I was super lonely, blowing through money like crazy. I felt irresponsible and I just hated life. And I couldn't believe, the apartment was gorgeous. And I'd stand on the balcony of the 13th floor and I would just look over that balcony for what seemed like hours, thinking about it, thinking about what it would be like and how it would feel to hit the ground and how would people find me and what would they think and who would be told first and just all these things go through your mind. And just when I would think that I got to that point where, yeah, I think I can do this, my daughter's picture would flash into my head, and I'd be like, no, I can't. And that would make me feel terrible because I'd be like, I'm stuck. I'm stuck here. I can't do it because I can't leave her.
Mhm.
When things got really rough money wise, I was like, well, I need to go back to work. The friend that bought my school offered me a job managing the school. Yeah, that was
Mhm.
my old school. Now, again, I had this emotional attachment to it with my ex-wife. During the divorce, when I wasn't going into work, I would open the door of the school and just reach my hand into the register without going inside because I couldn't stand going inside the place because it would just
Mhm.
freak me out. But here I was accepting a job there and I didn't know how I was going to do it, how I was going to pull it off. Every day was just flashes of memories. And I would go down into the locker rooms and cry my eyes out and think about how I wanted to end it. There were these pipes, so I would think about like, hanging something from the pipes. And in my head, I always thought, okay, I'm going to do it with one of my black belts. I have one that's monogrammed. That was the first one I got. So I thought it'd be poetic to do it that way. So that was my idea. So I'd look around the space and think about it, and I'd look at trees, and when I was walking around and think about what tree I could use. The tree thing went on for a long time.
Mhm.
Seems like whenever I get into that state, when I walk around, I'm observing nature for a different reason instead of like soaking it in because I feel good. I'm looking for a place to end it. So finally, one day at the academy, I was downstairs in the locker room, and I felt like I can't take this anymore. One of my closest friends told me that his dad ended his life by tying the rope around his neck and then tying it to a doorknob. He just sat down and he was like, I know he really wanted to do it because all he did was sit down and just accept it. He could have gotten up at any time. He could have stood up. And the night that he told me that story, it really shook me and it made me think, well, I could never do it because my friend is still traumatized from it and he's an adult. But this day, it got so bad that I just couldn't take it. And I was in the locker room. I thought about the story my friend told me. There was a steel door with a metal handle on it, which was pretty high, the handle. So I tied my black belt to one end and I tied the other end to my neck and I leaned into it, stood up and I leaned until I felt the choke. And I know what it feels like to get choked to sleep, because it's happened to me several times. So I was starting to go black, everything started to get kind of starry and like when you pass out, when you get choked out. And then the belt gave way, like it came off the doorknob, kind of fell forward. And I remember kind of just looking back and thinking, I think I was there. I think I was, I think if I would have gone under, it might have been it. And I remember thinking, well, okay, this proves that you can do it. And at that point, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to try again right now. I just know that I can do it. And I'm going to keep that in my back pocket now. And I think in a way that was like oddly reassuring to me.
That was what, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
What's it been like since?
Feels like it was way longer ago. It feels like it was many, many years ago. Since it's been a lot of up and down. I mean, the last year I've been stable, but before that, year and a half, 2 years, I was up and down a lot and I was going through a lot of flashbacks and I was terribly suicidal and depressed. I had to find the right mix of meds before I kind of leveled off.
I can't imagine how many people we lose because they haven't found the right med combo yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was on a lot and it was just not the right dosage of one in particular of the mood stabilizer. And once I adjusted that, I stabilized. Life was still crazy though. So I still had like kind of circumstantial depression, like because of the situations, but it wasn't that deep, deep, dark suicidal depression anymore. So now I only get like very short flashes of ending things, like they zip in and zip out. I don't dwell on it, but particularly when things feel like they're going really, really bad, I think my brain tends to go there kind of
Yeah.
first, get out, escape. And that's the way to escape. So I jumped to that pretty quickly.
When was the last time that happened?
Probably a couple of weeks ago. Might have only been a couple of weeks or a few weeks because I remember telling my therapist I've been having some thoughts, but it's been
Huh.
kind of just quick flashes. And I had kind of not a scare, but like I thought I was getting hypomanic a couple of weeks ago because I felt very light, and I felt it's weird when I feel really, really good. I start to worry because I feel like, all right, the tide is going to turn. I'm getting hypomanic. That means a crash is going to come. So it's tough because you're frightened when you're happy. You're frightened when you're depressed. Yeah. Like, I don't know, like being happy could lead to me being suicidal essentially. Where do you go from there?
And then you gotta wonder. No, you don't have to, but I've met a lot of people wonder. This is going to be it for the rest of my life. Am I okay with that?
Yeah, that's a rough one to think about, because you always imagine, or at least you hope that you're going to get better and you're going to be able to
Hmm.
get off the medication, and that's the goal. But I think the fact is, with some of this stuff, I'm going to be dealing with it for the rest of my life. It's kind of about
Hmm.
adjusting to that and managing it. It's not going
Hmm.
to go away. But I'm definitely hopeful that the more I build skills, that I'm going to have a good handle on things. I also know what's going on now. I didn't know what was going on during my 30s or my 20s. I didn't really know the extent of the disorders. So I couldn't label anything. I couldn't, pinpoint anything where any of this was coming from. But at least now I
Yeah.
know.
While all this is going on in the last 10 or so years, you're also a dad.
Yeah. When my daughter was 6 months old, my wife threw me a surprise 40th birthday party. All my students were there, all my friends were there. There was like more love in the room than I've ever felt in my life. And it stands out because of that, because of, how amazingly loving everybody was. But it also stands out because it was the most depressed I've ever been. When I got there to the party, I'd been suicidal for quite a while. And again, I had a 6 month old
Mhm.
that I was like head over heels in love with, but I still was in a really bad place at the time. So when I walked in there and I got showered with all this love, it made me feel amazing for a little bit. I mean, everybody should have a day like that, like everyone made a circle and they all went around saying, what I've done for their lives and how much I mean to them, and felt a little culty, to be honest. Like one of my friends, when it got to my friend, he goes, he goes, "Wow, I never knew Julio would have his own cult one day," because everybody was just like, "Oh my God, I love you so much." So when I left there, I felt amazing, but it only took a couple of days for me to feel unloved and worthless again, and to
Mhm.
again be depressed. And I thought it would sustain me a little bit longer than it did, but
Earlier, you said something about the day before your life fell apart. Which day was that?
the day it fell apart, it was something that happened with my ex-wife where I knew the marriage was over at that point. So essentially, we had an argument. We both said some things. It was clear the marriage was over, but we had agreed that even if we broke up, we were going to keep living together to take care of our daughter. But in that moment, she changed her mind and she said, "No, you have to move out." I am in love with my daughter beyond anything in the universe. She's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So leaving her, just the thought of that fucking crushed me. Like, I mean, my heart literally felt crushed into smithereens. And I fell on the bed and I remember crying, at the apartment, moaning like this guttural moan. I always describe it as if Chewbacca was crying, and it just felt like a primal kind of a cry. Then my life collapsed and I had to leave my home, the home that, we had just finished getting built out, and leave my daughter. And as a kid, that was my greatest fear, like my parents breaking up, because they fought so much and there was just so much yelling in the house and stuff. So I never wanted to be that guy that left home. My parents, despite how much they fought, they stayed. Despite how much my dad was maybe unhappy at points, he stayed. And I wanted to be able to do the same. I didn't want to fail at that. So that day I felt like a failure, not just as a father, but as a dad. And that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. So I had to leave my home and leave my family. And I had already made the decision. Well, no, I hadn't made the decision to sell the school yet. So I didn't know that was coming yet. That came right after. I ended up splitting from my jiu-jitsu team that I trained with for 12 years, probably. So that was like another family to me. And so I split from them. So I felt like my whole life was gone. It was completely altered, like in a flash, you know. The selling of the school was my doing, but it was what I felt I needed to do at the time, you know. So
That was several years before the second attempt, right?
yeah, that was I think
Gee,
3 years before.
rough patch.
Oh yeah, it was rough. That moment that I was crying on that bed, every disorder was like, oh, we're awake. Now
Mhm.
we're gonna fuck with your life. Brought everything back up.
Yeah. Weird quick transition here too. How many podcasts have you been on?
Eight altogether. Two of them were for the first book though. So I think I've
Oh,
done six for this one.
is that you or do you have an agent?
No, it's me. It's me. I have a publisher, but you know, publishers they just handle kind of publishing your book and they don't do a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
marketing these days. They count on the author to do a lot of marketing. So
It's a hustle right now. Of the podcasts you've been on that are around mental health, were they open and about suicide with you?
we didn't really talk about it.
Isn't that interesting? Not knocking them.
No.
They have different podcasts and just isn't discussed, Julio,
Yeah, and it's the fear, I think, fear that people have of the subject.
which just makes it worse. Weird thing. Pink and purple pill question, Julio. If you take the pill, you go to sleep. There's no pain. You don't wake up, and nobody knows it's a suicide. What would you do with the pill as we talk right now on June 30th, mid afternoon?
I'd flush it. Here's why, because for Father's Day, my ex-wife gave me a digital picture frame that flashes pictures of my daughter, and it's in my periphery right now. The answer becomes easy that way, you know.
You think there'll ever come a point? I know we're speculating when you don't ideate.
It's been so long that it's hard to imagine being completely clear of it. I'd like to think that I will get to a point. Yeah, I've been single and celibate over 3 years now on purpose. I've been taking this time to, you know, to get more complete with myself and like so that I don't reach out just for low hanging fruit and get anybody to fill the space, you know. Why did I start talking about that? You threw me
I
off.
fucked you up. I screwed you up.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think it was generally around like healing. You take time for yourself and other things. Yeah.
Got into a relationship after my divorce. It became super toxic, but I'm really grateful for it because she was a mirror for me. You know, I could see the way I used to behave. I could see, you know, how I contributed to my marriage falling apart, which I hadn't really seen so clearly before. I kind of reversed roles, you know, so it was really helpful. I
Mhm.
stopped getting angry after that relationship. Like I don't explode anymore. I don't get like over worked up about stuff anymore because I saw what someone looks like in that state, you know, being just completely furious and over the top angry. And I don't know, I just don't want to deal with that. So during the time that I was in that other relationship, I wasn't giving myself time to heal because again, I was filling that space. I was filling the silence, so to speak, with someone else. So that relationship slowly became more and more toxic and then eventually it kind of exploded and I walked out of there. I was hypomanic actually when it broke down. Let me back up a little bit. So I was in a deep depression. I was thinking about suicide constantly. And I decided, okay, I'm gonna take this whole weekend, I'm gonna take 3 days, lock myself in the room, and I'm just gonna write and do nothing to take away the pain. I'm just going to do nothing to take away the pain. I'm just going to deal with it. So I spent the weekend writing and crying on the floor, writing and crying on the floor. It was like the most like cathartic, the most kind of enlightening time that I'd ever had by myself. My girlfriend at the time, she left me alone during those 3 days. And after 3 days, I felt like a new person. I felt like so much lighter. And I know now that those 3 days triggered my hypomania, but at the time I felt like, oh my God, I'm cured. And I did it myself. And so we're having a conversation. Slowly we got into an argument. And I was like, look, I don't want to argue. I feel so good right now. The last thing I want to do is argue. But it was over such a silly thing. She was very persistent. Finally, I went into this weird state. I was back when I was a little kid in my mind, and I made this sound that I used to make when I was a kid, this revving sound that I would make to keep people away from me.
Wait, I want to hear it.
It'd go like that, but I
Mm.
do it really, really loud. And that was kind of the sign to back away from me, to leave me alone. So I made that sound. I told her the story of how I used to make the sound, and then I made the sound super loud. I felt myself all of a sudden being zipped into a light, right? How people talk about these near death experiences. I felt myself get zipped into a light, and I was in this completely white kind of space, right? I call it the white room when I talk about it because it just felt like I was in this white room that was overwhelmingly beautiful. I mean, it was incredible. I witnessed a murder when I was around 8 years old. So I was back in that at that moment when I saw the murder. I was behind the little kid as the adult that I am now. I just told the kid that he was safe, that I was there to protect him now and everything's okay. And then I zipped out of it. And when I came up, I had been in tears and I came up with this huge smile on my face. And I just said to my girlfriend, that's it. I mean, I saw something incredible just now. Death isn't real and we have nothing to worry about. And I went into full blown hypomania, but it felt as real as my hand feels right now. So I had zero doubt. So from there, I spent days and days and days, actually weeks, sitting and like just staring at nature and like looking at trees and not for the reason that I do when I'm depressed, just fascinated by life and fascinated by everything. And I would see faces and like it could be a splatter of paint and I would see like a face in it, everywhere I'd see a face. So my ex-girlfriend, it became a lot for her, obviously. And at the time, I didn't realize how overwhelming I was. She didn't know how to take it, what I was going through. She had no idea. So initially I thought I was misdiagnosed with bipolar because my doctor told me that he thought it was something else after a little while, but it turned out to be bipolar. But I wasn't getting the right medication when he thought that I was misdiagnosed. So that caused issues. So I would go into full blown hypomania because I wasn't on mood stabilizers and it was a lot for her to take. And then finally I just couldn't take the arguing anymore. And I packed all my shit and I left the house at like 11 o'clock at night. I had no idea where I was going to go. I had no money. I was just like, I got to get out of here. So I'm sitting on my luggage on a corner in Queen, but I was happy as shit. I was like, I've never felt better. This is incredible. I don't care. I'm technically homeless right now, but I'm fucking so happy. So I called my sister. It turned out she was out of town. Called my nephew. My nephew came by, picked me up. I went and stayed at my sister's house for a couple of weeks. And I was hypomanic the whole time. And I felt like life was incredible and life was so great and everything's amazing. And then slowly I sort of feel myself getting more and more down. And then I realized, okay, something's coming here. I'm about to hit depression again. And then it hit me like a fucking train. And I had been off my meds. I got off my meds on my own, the antidepressants and everything else. I didn't, wean myself off. I didn't tell my doctors I was going to do it. So I went like into the deepest depression I think I've ever, up to that point, I'd ever gone through. My ex-wife, she insisted that I call my psychiatrist and get back on the meds. And she's been a huge, huge help. Her, I've talked to everything about. We had a bitter time like right after the divorce, but because of our daughter, we both agreed that we first treat each other cordially, and then eventually that grew into us being friends again. And so she's been super supportive, thankfully. Through my lowest times, I can tell her, what I'm dealing with. She's a mental health professional also, so she's never judgmental. She's dealt with her own issues, and
Let's not assume that all mental health professionals are not judgmental, but I'm glad
yeah,
she isn't.
right. She isn't. She isn't. Yeah.
Let's be clear about that. But just for the sake of both myself and the audience, so we bounced around a little bit. So what you were just sharing with the ex, it was before the attempt, the second attempt.
The attempt happened before I moved in with the new girlfriend.
Okay. Did the new girlfriend know that you had attempted?
Yes, she did. She knew about the one in the basement. She was very supportive at first, but just like with a lot of people, it becomes too much after a while,
Yeah.
which I totally understand now too. So when I was with her, I would tell her all the time that I wanted to die and that the only thing keeping me around was my daughter. And for somebody to hear that, who's your significant other, that's painful. It wasn't her that was keeping me around. So that was rough.
You fighting these days in a good way?
I'm training jujitsu again. I took like 2 years off going to be with a team, and then I ended up joining one of my closest friends' academy. So it's been great to get back to it. And I mean, I've been still sparring with my private clients. So I've never stopped. Even though I say I took a couple of years off, I never stopped. But being in the atmosphere of someone else's academy and learning from someone else and becoming a student again, I've done that in the last 7 or 8 months. And it's been amazing to not be the center of attention in the classroom, and not be the one that everyone's looking to, like, to set the example in the room. I mean, as a black belt, you still have to set an example, but it's different than being that instructor. So it's been great to be able to do that.
Did you have any stays in a mental health facility or psych unit ever?
No, but I had my therapist suggest to me a couple of times that I check myself in. And I was very, very close a couple of times. I think I was afraid that they would keep me. And that's why I never went in, but I definitely had moments where I felt like I needed it.
Does anyone else? I asked you about the first attempt, and who knows? Because I do think that matters. I wonder what people. It doesn't matter. I wonder who we tell these things to. Does anyone else know about the second attempt in the basement?
Yeah, yeah, people know. I've been pretty open about that second attempt. The first chapter of the new book kind of opens with it. I've been open about it because I'm just in a different place about what people can handle or what they need to hear,
Hmm.
So I don't worry as much about making people uncomfortable by stating my truth, as kind of morbid as it may seem to some people. And again, I want people to know that like somebody who's strong on the outside can just be dealing with so much pain on the inside, and that it's not a sign of weakness.
No. Of all the people you that know about it, or that it's particularly that you've talked to, not necessarily somebody who read it in a book, but what percentage of people respond in a way where it feels like they're cool with it? Because I imagine you get some people that just say the weird shit or the
It's 50-50 where it's like half of them are like, wow, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. I didn't know you were dealing with that. And half are angry. They're like, why the fuck would you ever think about that? How could you
Mm.
ever think about leaving anybody? You know what that would do to so and so and so and so? Those are generally the two reactions that you get. Or no, there's a third, but they're much fewer. They'll say they've never thought about it. Can't imagine wanting to do that, as if they've never had that mindset.
Damn, aren't those people tough to relate to? Let's be honest.
And I can't imagine not thinking
If you
about
look
it.
up at the sky, what color is this? It's mostly blue to me. Tell me what color.
Right. Yeah.
So, how many people do you have in your life as we talk right now where you can tell them anything, including suicidal ideations or even planning, let's say, and you can talk to them and feel okay about it and with no fear or no shame or just really have a good conversation?
Two, two people that I know wouldn't get angry, wouldn't judge. There might be a third. No, actually, no. You know what? I'm wrong. There are three that I know for sure. One of them's my closest male friend, one of them's my ex-wife, and one is my therapist, who's also turned into a friend. More than a lot of people, I guess.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe in God?
I grew up an atheist in a very religious family, but my views on God have changed a lot for the years. And when I lived by myself after my divorce, I was cycling really, really badly. So part of the hypomania and spirituality kind of collided. So I had some really like visceral experiences where they felt like I felt them fully throughout my body, and they felt like I was having a spiritual experience. Because of those experiences that I can't say were not real, and moments where I felt like I was kind of just a ball of love. I do believe in something higher than us for sure. But I feel like God is just the totality of everything. And we're part of that thing. And we may not know what our role is in that thing. We could be the cog that moves something, we could be the little hand on a clock, or who fucking knows what we are. We could be neurotransmitters on this bigger creature, but there's something that we're a part of.
As we've been talking, some of the things that come up typically are sort of myths or misconceptions around all of this stuff. Are there any that we didn't talk about that you want to dispel or call bullshit on it?
Yeah, it's that you're selfish. That one is irritating. Especially, that one I thought about a lot when my buddy took his own life, because I knew he wasn't a
Right.
selfish guy. He'd been so generous to so many people, including me. He gave so much of himself. And I'm sure that some people looked at him and said, how could he do that to his kids? The depth of the pain that he must have felt. I've tried putting myself in his place at that last moment. It must have been a level of pain that maybe I haven't felt in my life, because to rip him away from his children, it's got to be
Hmm.
the ultimate.
It's such a way to flip it where it's like selfish. How about that just speaks to how much pain? And no one can endure pain for that long. I don't care who you are. Tell me about the books. I mean, I know we've touched on some of the content of the books, but whatever you want to share about the books. And I'm also kind of curious about your process, but
So the first book was supposed to be a book about using principles of jujitsu to navigate through mental health and life's problems. But because I was so symptomatic, it was just, feeling great one day, feeling miserable the next. And I never wanted to take a day off of writing. So I wasn't waiting to feel good in order to write the chapters. So if I woke up feeling like shit, that's what I wrote about. That affects the through line in a lot of ways, because it probably seems in certain chapters that it's a different person writing. So I pitched it to a bunch of publishers and I wasn't being very patient because I wanted to, again, it took me a couple of years to finish it. I sent it to an editor and they sent it back and then I rewrote the whole thing like 12 times. And
Wow, wow, wow.
yeah, so I got to a point where, look, I just want to put this out so I can move on with my life, you know? So I published it myself and I was glad I got it out. It felt like I purged all that negative stuff I had in me, especially after the first few drafts. Like after the fifth draft or so, I started to take away kind of the vitriol because I processed it more. You know, I think the first several drafts helped me deal with the mourning that I hadn't dealt with before for my marriage and everything else my entire life. So I was a little scared about the stuff that was in the first book because it was so personal,
Mhm.
especially the stuff about my marriage. After it was published and my ex-wife was reading it, she actually called me and asked me to take some stuff out. So I went back and I took some stuff out. There's only a few of the first version that people have. Most people have the second version that doesn't have some of the details of my marriage, you know, just out of respect to my ex-wife. Because I wanted to get as raw as possible, and I did, you know, but I had to respect her. So for the second book, I got contacted by a friend of mine who told me that there was a publisher who was listening to pitches, and he suggested that I pitch them. I had a couple of chapters that I'd written already that could be the seed of the second book. So I sent them 3 chapters and then I didn't hear back. I totally forgot that I sent them. And a couple of months later, they sent me an email and they said they wanted to offer me a contract based on those 3 chapters. So, you know, I was super excited, obviously. And then I ended up banging it out in a couple of days because it'd been in my head for so long.
So, if I'm understanding, you created an entire book in less time than I make one podcast episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't,
So now's the time I tell Julio to go fuck himself
it was
officially.
probably it was probably a touch of hypomania happening at the time, you know, and it
Well, it's still Julio doing the
you know
work. I don't.
yeah. Yeah, the publishers were pretty amazed that I got it to them so quick. You know, every deadline was pretty quick, but again, it was percolating for so freaking long that it just came out. And it turned out exactly how I wanted it to turn out. It's about again using the principles of martial arts to navigate through not just mental health issues, but obstacles that appear in your life. Because jujitsu is really the perfect metaphor for going with the flow of life. That's what the book talks about. And I was able to combine my experience, 25 years of martial arts, with, you know, all the pain I've had to deal with in recovery. So I felt like it was really doing what I was telling my ex-wife that day that I wanted to do, you know, to use a platform to help people deal with their issues.
Name the first book.
Broke down Sensei, how I fought
Okay.
trauma and bipolar disorder from the outside in.
Let me ask you this question. Do you remember the first line from that book?
I remember what was supposed to be the first line. It was supposed to be, I've felt like a fraud for my entire life. But I think somebody read like the first couple of chapters or something and was like, oh, that first line is so cliche. I ended up changing it to something else. I don't remember.
No, you don't have. And I'm wondering, would if you told us the last line, if you remember, would that just give it away? I mean, you don't want to give away the last line, right?
I could just say that it's optimistic. The second book is
Yeah.
called Internal Jujitsu, Conquering Mind and Body Resistance by Giving Way. The first line, in 2019, I tried to hang myself with my monogram black belt. So I guess it was, wow, 2019. Holy shit.
You were 44.
I was 44.
We finally got to the damn right age.
Wow. Let me tell you, man, bipolar fucks with your sense of time, and so does ADHD. The last 10 years feels like it's compressed and stretched out at the same time. It's so hard for me to keep track of what happened when.
Well, yeah. And now it makes sense what you were saying earlier with your ex-wife and then the girlfriend.
Right, right.
And more optimistically as well?
Yeah, I think this one overall is much more optimistic. It's really a guidebook of really how I used all these things that I've learned on the mat to help me through all these hard times. And it's definitely, I mean, because it was a huge help to me. The resilience that I built on the martial arts mat and knowing how to fight an opponent without just using anger and force, you know, learning to manipulate them by coercing them, you know, and not just trying to run through them. So for me, not just pushing back against depression, but realizing that I'm depressed and kind of going with it and asking myself some questions about it, but not just trying to say, well, I'm not depressed, you know, because that
Yeah.
shit doesn't work. I got my message across with the second book. It's something that jiu-jitsu players can read and get a lot out of, but so can someone that doesn't train at all.
You brought up a good number of people in your life, partners, kids, students, among others. What do you want to say to either one of them that I named, or maybe collectively all of them, that they may hear sometime in 2025, 2026, who knows, 30 years from now, in this little magical device probably in their hands?
What I would want to say, in particular to my daughter, is that me thinking about killing myself had nothing to do with them, and nothing to do with how much I love them or how much I would miss them. It was all about the pain that I felt inside, that they shouldn't see it as a reflection of how I felt about them.
Nicely said. Anything else you want to add about anything we talked about?
This is kind of what I always want to talk about. It's being able to talk to kids, younger kids in particular, young kids who seem a little more advanced than others, because they're thinking about problems that adults are thinking about. Often kids are dismissed when they feel down because adults will think, well, they don't have any problems, but that's not how those kids feel, and there are kids that want to take their own lives because not only do they feel like they can't handle the world, but no one is taking them seriously. No one is really, really asking them how they really feel. And they don't feel like they can trust anybody to not judge them and not be harsh with them. So I think understanding that a kid can feel those suicidal feelings and that we have to treat them just as real as we would with adults.
Well, thanks, Julio. This has been great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate it.
And I know that people that hear it will benefit from it. But the tagline for this particular podcast is "Less shitty, less alone." That's really the goal, and it helps me feel that way. Weirdly, it helps some of the listeners, and I know that because they tell me. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man.
And buy Julio's books. I hope things continue to go well for you, or as well as they can, and have a decent day.
Thank you. You too.
Take care, bud.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
As always, thanks so much for listening and all of your support. Special thanks to Julio in New York. Thanks, Julio. If you are a suicide attempt survivor or ideator and you'd like to talk, I would love to talk with you. Please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com. Thank you all very much for your support, for listening, for giving a shit, and I hope your day doesn't suck. That's all for this week's episode. Stay strong. Do the best you can. I will talk to you soon.